Welcome, everybody, to today's presentation on IT and cybersecurity assessment for mergers and acquisitions. My name is Mike Moffett. I'm president of Cornerstone Financial Group, and if I were to summarize what we do in a nutshell, we try to help make businesses more valuable. And as we get going through the presentation, I'll explain that a little bit more. But basically, we're looking at companies that are getting close to making a transition somewhere down the road, whether it be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and looking at ways to make those businesses more valuable and more sellable. And a lot of things factor into that. And obviously, one of the things that I think factors into it, and I'm sure Ron agrees with me, is IT and cybersecurity. So Ron's my guest today, Ron Searle. He's owner of Business Cybersecurity Solutions, also PCS International, which was his first company that he started. He's kind of a serial entrepreneur. He's a really busy guy. We're glad to get him. I met him through one of the webinars we actually had a few months ago and had some nice conversations since, and Ron's on top of this, and I think you'll see that as you see the presentation progress. This is part of what we call our BEST webinar series, and BEST is an acronym that stands for Business Enhancements, Strategies, and Tools. And it's the 8th one we've done so far. We kind of started this as COVID took over as a way that we could reach out to business owners without having personal one-on-one interaction with them. And it's been pretty popular, and we've decided to bring a lot of folks in that we think can help wealth creators grow and preserve their legacies. So most of these folks are, entrepreneurs on their own in many cases, and folks that we think can help you add value to your business. So most businesses start from scratch. They start from somewhere, right? Even Microsoft and IBM started somewhere. I think Microsoft might have started in Bill Gates' garage, but at any rate, ours started on a kitchen table back in 1987. It looked just like this one. I was able to find this one on the internet. And I put that kitchen table in our basement, the house that was built probably in 1926. It had cinder block walls. I put it right over the one light bulb in the room. And that's where I started my business. Didn't have much to work with. The two things that were on it were the old IBM 8086 and an Okidata dot matrix printer, which did a fantastic job of printing very professional letters. And I think a lot of you probably have started in a similar fashion. So, when you look at the odds of us getting here where we are in our businesses today, they're long. New startups, if you look at the statistics, 90% of them fail. They just don't even get to 5 years. And less than 50% make it to the 5th year. And over 80% end up failing due to cash flow problems. So I want to definitely congratulate everybody who's on this call, because more than likely you're a pretty successful company if you've gotten this far in life and in your business. So a couple notes here I want to point out. Like the other webinars that we've done, this one is in listen only mode. And the reason we do that is because the topics that we talk about often are geared more towards folks who are looking maybe to sell their business in a few years, and they don't necessarily want everybody else to know they're on the call. So because of that, this webinar is in listen only mode. And that doesn't mean you can't ask questions. You can. You'd have to use the chat feature to do that, however. And so I think probably most of us are fairly familiar with Zoom at this point. So if you want to ask a question, you can use the chat feature on Zoom. Just remember, if you don't want to be identified, if you want to maintain your privacy on that issue, you'll want to send those questions to the presenters. So not everybody will see those. So our presenter today is Ron Searle, and Ron is president and founder of PCS International, which he started in 1986. PCS Cloud Solutions he started in 2015, and Business Cybersecurity Solutions he started in 2016. His businesses are a comprehensive solution provider satisfying the information technology, hardware, software, and professional service requirements for small and medium-sized businesses. He is currently serving as virtual CIO for over 40 organizations. He's a regular presenter to the Illinois CPA Society chapters. He works with C-suite, IT users, and everyone in between to offer common sense solutions without the technical jargon, which I can attest to in my visits with Ron. His other professional experience includes serving as president of Savings Consulting Group, property management business consultant, and property developer construction business consultant for 16 years, and a private school consultant. His educational background includes a BS in computer science from Purdue, an MBA and Master of Project Management from the Keller Graduate School of Management. His certifications include MCSE, AWS, SAA, and over 100 more. In his spare time, Ron has managed to become a 3-time triathlete, Ironman triathlete. And the only thing I question about all this is how he can be a triathlete, because I don't think from what I read here, he probably has any spare time. But I'll let Ron explain that to you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ron. Welcome, Ron.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. And yeah, as far as having time to do Ironman, it is about making the time. But it's a great thing to do. And I like to keep busy, and I like to keep in on a lot of things going on in our, in our world. And I love the technology universe because, quite frankly, it allows me to be constantly challenged. Going into today, we are going to talk about a few things that I enjoy both sides. I like the business side. As you can see, I'm somewhat of a serial entrepreneur. I have been helping many of my clients grow. We have clients that have been with us for over 30 years continuously. And the reason we do that is we pay attention to their business. And I've always enjoyed the technical and the business side. So often we're brought up into play when it comes to mergers and acquisitions and how the technology stuff plays into that transaction. And, on the technology side, we all know that the world is becoming more and more technology oriented. And the thing that we don't understand is the cybersecurity side. Is like, we know it's a problem. If you read it in the news, you know that. However, what you probably don't know is how to assess whether or not you have a risk. All right, you hear the big scary stories in the news. They're true, they're real, and they are only a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. And so how do I protect my business, my organization, now and in the future? And it's been obviously a very busy area for us. Something that we've been doing for even longer, though, is the IT side of things. And so we're going to talk about an IT and network assessment so that we can look at, what are our risks there? Is our spending appropriate? Whether you're looking to buy, sell, or just grow your business, understanding your cyber risk, understanding your IT and your network risk is important. And even more so because of this fourth line item that we're going to talk about, which is privacy and regulatory changes. Like it or not, what you've been doing today is not what you will be doing in the future. Plain and simple. How you protect your data, if you protect your data, how you collect data, if you collect data. These are all questions that we never really worried about before, but we have to now. There are huge consequences to not doing it. So that was definitely why we added it into our presentation here. So real quick, let me kind of verbalize how my different businesses play into this universe. So Business Cybersecurity Solutions is actually our newest company. It is only 5 years old. We are doing great. And we are very busy right now because of the massive changes that have occurred. Cybersecurity risks are nothing new. What's new is the pervasiveness within the small, medium business market. PCS International is our IT network, break fix, help desk. These are all words you might associate with an IT provider. If you have an in-house IT person, we effectively do that on an outsourced model or a co-managed model where you work with your team. So those two companies are really the focus of today. We do have a third, which is PCS Cloud Solutions, where we focus on all things cloud. The trio of organizations really addresses every need regarding technology that a small or medium business might have. And that's why we did it, is it's really just to complete the offerings for our customers. Who are our customers? Well, wide range of industries, primarily United States. What we really love to do is provide enterprise level solutions to any size business, which is somewhat different. A lot of small businesses just assume that they can't have this, that, or the other because they're too big. We have really refined and developed the model of providing those enterprise grade solutions down to a pricing model and a solution set that makes sense for them. Because the needs aren't any different. The risks aren't any different. So the solutions shouldn't be any different. Manufacturing, construction, and development, those are three big ones. Education, particularly private schools, we do a lot of work with them. Property managers, not-for-profits, insurance organizations, the list goes on. If you have a need for IT, we've probably had some experience in it.
So Ron,
Yeah.
quick question there. What's too big? What's too small as a customer?
So it depends on our engagement level. It's a great question. So with our larger companies, let's say the Fortune 1000, we typically fill a very, very niche specific need that they don't have in-house. The medium-sized business tends to have an IT team. So we often will do what's called a co-managed engagement, where literally we're filling in the blanks, where their team, it doesn't make sense for them to build their team around a certain technology because they don't need that much help all the time. I'm going all the way down to the small business where we can literally take over their entire IT function if they like. And so it's really any of those are acceptable. It's simply what makes sense for that size business. And I find ourselves doing a lot more of the co-managed situation than anything nowadays, because often places will have, I got a guy as my number one competitor, right? I got a guy who can do this, but he can't do this. Well, we can fill that gap. Make sense?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So when we think about or talk about mergers and acquisitions, let's just kind of rehash, why do we do a merger and acquisition, right? So one is growth. So you got either new markets that you want to sell your existing products, or you want new products to sell within your existing markets. So either way, we want to do more. We're either scaling up or out, and technology is a great way to do scaling, quite frankly. All right. So growth is a big one. And when you integrate two firms, whether you're buying them, merging with them, or even selling your own, but really from the buy or side of it, is you need to make sure that your stuff and their stuff align. Otherwise, you're not going to get those economies that you hoped for. Savings. Obviously, when you look to acquire another firm, the idea here is there should be some economies of scale, whether it is merging the IT teams, merging the administrative teams, whatever. There's usually some overlap, and we want to identify where that is. Technology and security can play into those. We'll talk more about that later. And then lastly, another core objective is strategy, right? You're looking to maybe reduce your risks, get some kind of new technology that the other firm has, or maybe some skills, some of the talent pool that they have, so you can become more competitive, or just eliminate the competition, buy them out, take them out of that market space, and allows you to do a better job of stabilizing your costs and your prices. But either way, all of those things, reducing my risk or adding a technology, those all relate one way or another back down to the cyber side or the network side. And we'll work on connecting those dots as we go. But obviously, there has to be a point to doing that transaction. And in order to make that transaction successful, you need to understand what you're getting. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. Is simply knowing, what am I getting into? Traditionally, when you did an M&A, and by the way, I've done 8 of them so far within my own history, taking either some failing IT firms and folding in the successful portions, or somebody retiring. These were the tools that we used. When I go back 20 years ago to the transactions I did back then, what did we do? We did an audit of their finances, right? You need to know, have an unbiased view of what their finances look like. That's obviously a basic. The forecast. Well, what's going to happen when you merge these firms? What is going to really occur as far as additional revenue? Clearly, that's got to be of value in order for this to make sense. Typically, when you're buying another organization, you want more than they're producing, not just what you're getting, what they're getting today. Background checks. You need to understand the company, the people, the executive team. You need to understand that. You need to understand there have been lawsuits, things of the sort. And lastly is market research. Will the market support your new merged entity? I've seen a couple of organizations in my space buy 2 or 3 competitors, merge them all together, only to find out that they're facing the exact same problems they had before because the market was too congested, right? So you got to understand your market as well. Now, these are all the things we've been doing for a very, very long time in M&A, but the world's changing, okay? In the last 5, 10 years in particular, those same core 4 apply. But what's new is understanding the cybersecurity, understanding the IT and the network side of things, because there's some big implications of not knowing. Just keying in on the cybersecurity side, if you don't know how secure the new target is, the company you're looking to merge or acquire, you could be opening up a can of worms. You could be exposing yourself to liability. And even if you get the lawyers to cover you from the liability side, it still can become a disaster from a public relations and a customer retention perspective. You don't want that. You do not want this new entity poisoning your perfectly good entity that you have today because they don't have their practices in line with the way you do. And on the IT and network assessment, you need to understand how your costs are today and how your costs will look like in the future. Are you buying tons of equipment for IT on both entities? Will you need them all when you do this? What about your IT teams? Are they already understaffed and merging them will make it perfect? I bet you it's not likely. You need to evaluate who is doing what to make sure that we're spending correctly. And then the big one, the big elephant in the room here is your licensing costs. Most IT departments simply don't know what those are and how to control them. And so when you merge, you will simply, or acquire, you will need to know what those costs are going to look like ongoing, because they can be pretty extensive. For example, if the firm you're looking to acquire just signed a 5-year agreement on some huge software project, well, you need to know, because that's your cost coming up in the future. So again, it's a lot of knowing what we're getting into. All right, so let's move on to a cybersecurity assessment. What's the point? Well, ultimately, the point is, where is the risk in my organization? And thankfully, there's an easy way to do this. I say easy, I'm in the industry, but there's a straightforward way to do this. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST for short, these guys are a non-regulatory body that is created by our government, that's created this framework, amongst other frameworks, that helps us assess the cybersecurity risk in an organization. It is an unbiased, it is vendor agnostic, it is peer reviewed, and it is a well-established framework. And the reason I focus on the word framework is because it's a reproducible system that can be used to assess where you stand. And it's not somebody's opinion. These are well-established guidelines. We call them controls that you need to abide by if you're going to, be secure. And there's 5 major elements. I'm not going to get too geeky into it, but this framework, you'll see this from this little graphic. The first that we focus on is identify. Ask yourself, do I really know all the devices on my network? I bet you don't. I bet your IT guy doesn't either. Oh, I can figure it out. But you need to know what you have as far as equipment. You need to know what software you have. You need to know who your people are. And these sound obvious, and they should sound obvious, but the reality is most organizations could not give me an up-to-date hardware, software, and even staff inventory in a bigger company. Like if I were to audit those, I usually find that there's gaps, machines they didn't realize were on the network. Oh, I just temporarily put that there, right? You hear that all the time. So identify is number 1. Know what you have. Once you know what you have, then we can take steps to protect it. You cannot skip the first step. You gotta know what you got. Then we can put in place the things that are needed to protect that stuff, computers, software, data, people. Once I have protections in place, then and only then can I move on to detect, where I can actually understand where there's been an attack or a violation. Somebody's logging in or trying to log in from Russia, from Taiwan. Well, you don't do business in those places. Why should I have a login? Well, it's the bad guys knocking at your door. Most people don't even understand that this is common, daily, hourly in some places where these things are happening. So the ability to detect is predicated on having protection measures, which is predicated on understanding what we have. Once we have detection tools in place, we can do a respond, right? We can actually have a plan that says, if this happens, we will respond like this. If we see 20 logins from a country that we do not approve, we will lock that user account because we know it's under attack, right? So you can have a response plan once you can actually detect things. And the next and the final step is recover, which is what we do when we have to respond. So in that case, somebody's account is being, attempted to be broken into. We lock the account. Unfortunately, that means the person can't work. So now how do we recover from that event? Right. So it's a maturity level, quite frankly, that you work through with every organization. And there's many layers to this, both that virtual side, physical side, and the process side. So most of what we've been kind of talking about is virtual, but it applies to physical. If you don't lock the door to your business, then somebody can walk in and steal your server.
So Ron, how many people that you work with for the first time would you say have this stuff pretty well thought out?
Almost no one. It's the bigger the organization, the more likely they are. Or if they have a regulatory requirement, such as a healthcare provider, they have HIPAA, which is a NIST standard, by the way. If they collect credit cards, there's another one called PCI for credit card data. So those organizations were forced into it years ago. But most of the organizations tend to have word of mouth procedures, policies, identification. Like it's very loose. Like they kind of know what they're doing. I mean, if they've been around for a little while, then they've got a feel for how to run a business correctly, but nothing's been documented, formalized, or reviewed to make sure we're complying with it. When you hire a new HR person, do they know who to notify when someone's terminated? Just as an example, it's a big fail. That one right there, by the way, is having procedures that are tribal knowledge and not having procedures that are written, trained, and enforced. So It's interesting to see the results because they are all over the place. And it doesn't often take a huge amount of effort to fix it. It just takes a little focus. And that's where the framework's super helpful, because it's very clear what the control is, where we're at, what we have to do tends to be very simple.
I can tell you, Ron, there was a IT firm we used to work with. When I got to digging into the billing statement, they were actually billing us for service on somebody who had left about 2 years prior.
Right. Right. So that's a great example of process and procedure fail, right? Did they not notice? Were they not told? Like, all of those questions come to your mind that don't make any sense when you see them under the light of day, right? This doesn't make any sense. Why is this happening to me? Oh, maybe we didn't tell them, or maybe their procedures were so bad that they didn't stop the account. Some of the more recent hacks that have occurred, such as Colonial Pipeline, were in effect primarily a process failure, not a technology failure. And that's kind of starting to make people, when they understand that, it makes you realize that, oh, maybe we ought to take a look at this. Framework's how you do it. All right. So what is a cybersecurity assessment? So, and really why? So a cybersecurity risk assessment is to allow you to do some kind of risk management for whatever reason you might have, maturing your company or complying with regulatory, which is number 2. But it's a way of actually understanding where you're at. Now, there could also be, well, let me talk about regulatory again. For regulatory, I want to emphasize that all 50 states have more regulatory requirements coming, all 50. In the next year or two, you will see more and more and more of these things pass and change the nature of business as we know it. If you're in Virginia and you are regulated by the insurance board, you are now subject to some pretty severe regulatory requirements that didn't exist much long ago. So like really for their business, everything has changed. If you're trying to do business with the Department of Defense, even as a sub prime or a sub, you now have to comply with their requirements or you won't be able to bid and participate in those jobs. Like it's becoming a big deal. And then you get contractual reasons is the other one. Even if you're not affected, people you sell to may be affected. And that will then trickle down to you. There are some Fortune 500s who are now requiring a certain level of cybersecurity hygiene. In particular, the NIST Cybersecurity 800.53. That one is required by their contract with their subcontractors. So if you want to do business with them, you gotta get your act together. Entering new markets. If you are somebody that works, let's say in Ohio, and you've been in Ohio and you find an acquisition maybe that looks really attractive in California, you need to think again onto what your cyber stance is and what the target companies are, because California has some pretty significant requirements that are not required in Ohio yet. Obviously M&A, right? So this will influence your value. A lot of times when you're looking at trying to value your business, you get down to a multiple, and that multiple of earnings is somewhat gray, right? It can be interpreted. And that's what Mike does, is help you increase those multiples. Well, one of the ways to increase your multiple if you're a seller is to have your act together as a business and be able to prove it. And it allows you to, show the buyer, hey, I am in really great shape. You want to buy me and you want to pay a premium for me. And on the flip side, if you are looking to buy and you find that the other firm does not have their act together, you've got the opportunity to reduce that multiple, or at least the argument to do so. Organizational maturity. Some companies are growing fast, growing big, and as such, they know they need to get their act together. This is why a cybersecurity assessment is important, because it's part of that journey. Cybersecurity insurance. This is a big topic. If you're listening on this webinar and you do not have cyber insurance, I need you to call your insurance broker right after this webinar. You can wait that long. Then talk to them about getting cyber insurance. It's incredibly important, because any of these major, ransomware or other events like that could have some massive business killing impact. So if you get hit with ransomware, a $200,000 cost is not at all unreasonable for a small company, 30 people, right? It's big dollars. Having cyber insurance helps cover you. And as you try to apply for cyber or try to get a renewal for cyber, you're going to find that they're going to start asking more and more questions about how you've got your act together. And you better have the right answer, or your premium is going to shoot up. We've seen some people in 2021 getting a 3-time increase, 300% increase, because they answered poorly to the questions they were asked about what things they had in place. And so we've worked with them, and they've gone back and reapplied, and it was only a 25% increase. So it's, there's real money at stake here, but not having cyber insurance is really not an option.
And relative to that insurance, if some of you on the webinar have not seen the one we have on our YouTube channel on risk management, you might check that out too, because it probably ties in with this if you're a big enough company that you could benefit from looking at that. Quick question though, if you're looking to buy a company that hasn't done much and needs help, what should you do other than call Ron?
Call Ron. Now, really take a look at the NIST Cybersecurity Defense Framework. It is it's not light reading, but it is a good structured way. Don't fall into the trap of asking your IT guy, hey, are we secure? That's the funniest question I've ever heard. What do you think they're going to say? Yes, don't fire me. Realize that IT people are not cybersecurity people. So you should have somebody, whether it's, business cybersecurity solutions or otherwise, do an assessment for you. There should be a relatively low cost version of an assessment, and then a more comprehensive, detailed one. At least do the low cost one to get a general idea where you stand. We offer, free cyber checkups for people just to give them some awareness of the areas to focus in, because it really, sometimes it's a matter of just picking your priorities. Highest risk items first, and you just work your way down the list. Good question. Real quick, without getting too geeky, let's get into kind of what's going on in the cyber world. So last year with the pandemic, we saw a sharp increase in email threats. I won't get too deep into it, but basically email was a huge vector. And so obviously protecting email, having various filtering techniques was the best countermeasure. How did the breach happen? Well, a lot of these breaches happen from poor perimeter defense. What that means is that you're not doing a good job of keeping the bad guys out of your business. No or weak cybersecurity training. So going back to email, if you're not teaching people how not to click that link, I mean, you hear that said a lot, right? Don't click the link. How do people know what to click and not to click? It's, for a lot of people, it's very confusing. You got to do cybersecurity awareness training to educate people to the ever evolving threats. And lastly, poor data protection. You're just not paying attention to how you protect your data. This is something that should shock everyone, but it is, where did the attacks come from? 75% came from outside the network. Nobody's surprised about that. 25% of attacks came from inside the network. Let that sink in. 1 out of 4 attacks started on the inside, not the outside. That should be an eye opener. The bad guys are getting smarter every year. They've realized that if they can get on the inside, they've got easy pickings, and they're right. And so that's a change in philosophy from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was always the outside in. Now, not so much. What was taken? Credentials, personal information, money. And these numbers don't add up because sometimes they get both. But credentials and personal information are gold right now. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but they're really the key to people basically getting money from you one way or another, you or your creditors. Either way, the credentials are what they're after for a lot of cases, and personal information too, your home address, your work address, your social security number, birthday, secret passwords, all that fun stuff. So in 2020, what we saw was accelerating threats. I mean, a huge increase in threats and a reduction in spending, especially in manufacturing. They were the worst when it came to it. They're like, okay, we got to hunker down. Let's stop spending on everything. That was perfect storm to do the wrong thing. So what's happening in 2021? And these were actually my predictions from January. Work from home attacks. Absolutely. We sent everybody home, but we didn't address the security of what they have at their home. Ransomware with data leaks. Okay, so ransomware is where people encrypt your stuff and hold you hostage to pay them. Well, the new trick is to release your data. And that's a big change, because if they've got sensitive information and they start releasing that out to the public, you could be subject to notification laws, lawsuits from the people that their data got out, and regulatory penalties. So suddenly the order of magnitude is increased by a factor of 10 or more in what you have to do to clean up the mess. And they know that, and that's why they're doing it, and it works. They're collecting more money than ever. Passwords continues to be a huge problem. People are lazy with their passwords. They use weak passwords that are reused, place and place again. The bad guys know this. We are up to 22 billion as of September, billion with a B, passwords have been breached since the beginning of 2020. So that should terrify you, because that's about 4 passwords for every human being that walks on this planet. And it probably means that your passwords are included in it, or some of your passwords. And so password hygiene is a big problem, because it lets the bad guys get into places. And once they get into places, they can then extract information, which they can use for ill purpose.
Hey, Ron, a little bit on that ransomware before we get too far here. Is that something insurance covers typically, if you have it?
Yeah, if you have cyber insurance and it is a proper cyber policy, then the answer is yes.
Okay.
Typically they will pay for not only the notifications, these breach notifications, which are so expensive, but all the lawyers that you have to get to lawyer up because of the event, the ransom itself, if they decide to pay it, or the cleanup if they decide not to pay it. So you basically are paying professionals to address this situation and not trying to mop it up yourself. And there's a lot of value to that. And that doesn't necessarily mean your IT guy or gal is going to be locked out. We often work hand in hand with insurance companies to assist in the efforts, but the insurance is who's paying the bill. And those bills get big really fast. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars on small companies. You extend that out to big companies and it's millions and millions of dollars. Great. Last thing is IoT, Internet of Things. A lot of manufacturers in particular are moving towards these little sensors all throughout their network, which can tell them things like the temperature, speed, rotational velocity, things of the sort. All of these are very helpful for managing and monitoring their machines and their output. Super helpful. However, these devices tend to be very low cost and poorly secured, and worse yet, implemented by operations people. And it's such a common thing nowadays where they'll just go buy some sensors, put them on the network, not even tell the IT people, and suddenly you've put yourself at huge risk. Las Vegas, one of the casinos, had a breach that they came through the temperature sensor in the aquarium. All right, so that'll give you an idea. Like, you got to be thoughtful of it, and we're expecting these trends to continue because these devices are easy to break into. Takeaway, there's a couple of predictions. One of them was 6 trillion in losses. Total economic impact, ransom paid, and damages done. Just in July, there were over 1 million computers ransomware on July 2nd in a matter of 2 hours. Okay, it's a huge consequence worldwide. All right, so that was the cybersecurity side where we need to think about what we're securing, how we're securing it, and all of that. The other side, which is also important, is to think about an IT or network assessment. And again, I'm going to point back to, you can't really just ask your IT team to do this. They're biased. They might be great people, but they're also biased. They don't know what else is going on in the industry in many cases. And they simply, they're going to look at it through their own lens. And so having an external firm come in, do an assessment, we're going to look for risk, things that could cause you some serious grief should you acquire that company, or if you're the seller, things that you got to be careful of because it could affect your valuation. Opportunities for improvement. I mean, the whole idea between a lot of M&A activity would be to enhance the value of the combined entity. Well, where do we have potential for that? And lastly is compliance. All right, again, a lot of organizations are behind the times when it comes to paying attention to data privacy and complying with regulatory requirements. And since those requirements are changing, it's even more likely that they're simply not being addressed. All right, so what has happened to IT budgets? So just to give you some perspective here as to what it is that we care about and what are other companies doing. Right, so first of all, with COVID, it has been a really big driver of business transformation. And 76% of businesses plan on long-term IT changes. What does that mean? That means, for example, stopping using wet signatures on paper for a contract, moving to an electronic digitally signed contract, and just eliminating that whole piece of your business. That's just one very micro example, but there are many others. The fact that we're all on a Zoom webinar right now is just one example of how business has been changed forever. We're not going to go back to suddenly doing, meetings with donuts. Sorry if you like the donuts, but it's not coming back, and definitely not anytime soon. But there's a right place and a wrong place for a lot of these changes, and the world is sorting it out right now. But some of the fundamental ways we do business are here to stay. All right, and as a result, these transformation plans really drove tech spending in 2020, and a lot of the 2021 budget increases, and I'm going to predict even in 2022, will be to continue these efforts, to double down on those things that really work to transform your business. So when you're doing an IT assessment, the question is, are you transforming your business? Are you just standing still? Because if you're standing still, you're falling behind. Now, overall, IT budgets are expected to decline. Now, that's just interesting because why are we able to do that? Well, in part because if we're doing things smarter, moving to the cloud, for example, for some functions, we should be able to reduce our IT budgets as we complete these projects. So it's just something to keep in mind. I mean, we're not spending for the sake of spending. We're spending for the sake of transforming the business, and that might actually cause IT to shrink somewhat too, along with other spending. There's a big expectation that cloud and managed services. So cloud would be all those things that you instead of having a server in your office, you have it up in the cloud, somebody else's server, and managed services. So that's having an outside service company help with some or all of your support needs. And the reason for this is because it makes great sense. I mean, when you look at it economically and functionally, outsourcing a lot of those types of things does make sense. It's not a one size fits all. Let's be clear. Anybody who's trying to tell you you have to do all of this or all of that, they're probably just trying to sell you. And then plans to adopt emerging or brand new technology. Not surprisingly, they've really slowed this year, and I expect it to continue for at least another year because honestly, we're all transforming our business. We're no longer chasing the newest widget. And as such, we want to think about that as we're assessing a company is like, where are they spending their time and effort? Is it on this newest, coolest technology, or is it on something that fundamentally can help that business transform? Because that's really where the money should be spent. All right. Finding cost savings is always a bonus when we do these IT and network assessments, because when we get into them, we often find that by tweaking the formula that we use for our IT support, we are able to significantly change and make more agile companies because we're optimizing where we're spending our money. So for example, by utilizing your core team on certain core business functions, that makes sense. Why are we having our core team answer simple support questions? Simple help desk. My printer doesn't print. I can't open my email. Like, those are simple things that maybe it would be cheaper and better and faster for you to just outsource. And so that's part of that big trend, is finding the right mix of in-house and outsourced talent for your support. Kind of in line with that is going to a more recurring, a thoughtful recurring agreement model where we all have these monthly bills, whether it's your internet, voice, email, website, service contracts, whatever. When's the last time you audited any of those? When's the last time you evaluated what you were spending and whether it still makes sense to your business? Is that contract flexible? Will it grow or shrink based on your needs? This is the time to press those issues. And you can see some big savings by doing that. We were doing a whole bunch of calls back in April. Little quick aside. In April, so the middle, everybody just hunkered down. We're 2-3 weeks into it. We started making calls to customers, letting them know that they needed to start shutting down some of their cloud services. Because if they've already furloughed, let's say 20% of their staff, why are we paying for licenses for those 20 people or 20% of people, right? So people were shocked. They're like, we can do that. I'm like, yes, you can do that. So let's do that. Let's save you some money while you're hunkering down. And then when you bring the staff back, we can then bring those expenses back. That flexibility is something that's really awesome about the cloud. And if you get the right service provider, they're very adaptive with that too. And it makes your business more agile. So with the assessment, we need to know where you stand. And the last is your IT infrastructure, understanding where you are in the hardware lifecycle review. What's your mix of capital versus operating expenses? And how does that lay out over 5 years? We always look at IT stuff in a 5-year minimum perspective, because most of those devices will be replaced within 5 years. So if you've deferred expenses in 2020 and you're deferring them again in 2021, you are now 2 out of 5 years into the life cycle of that thing. This should cause some concern because it is a lot cheaper to replace something before it fails than after. Okay, the cleanup is always much worse and disruptive. So if we do the network assessment, one of the things that comes out of that is an understanding of these 3 pillars. so that we can really help your long-term. Regulations, I've alluded to it before, and it is something that is very, very current, and you can expect to see probably by the end of the year another 1 to 2 dozen regulations being passed. There's a lot of them that are on the finish line right now that all revolve around things like privacy, data security. My industry, managed service providers, looks like there would be some legislation in Texas and Louisiana because there's been some problems down in those regions, and now the politicians are involved. So what about your industries? What will happen to the requirements that you have to comply with, not only operating your business today, but if you were to get involved with a sale or a buy? And understanding where you are is the only way we can tell you what is it going to cost to get ready for those changes. Kind of back to that NIST framework where identify was the first. If you don't have a good understanding of where you're at, there's no way you can plan for where you need to be. Last thing, and I'll take some questions, is privacy. When you're looking to acquire a firm, there's kind of 4 areas that you need to focus on, lots of ways to do it, but it ultimately comes down to what you store, how you store it, how long you store it, and what regulations apply. We can no longer ignore data privacy. It is a very, very hot topic right now. The European Union, they passed the GDPR a few years ago. California has some very strict requirements as well. So if you're doing business with any of those, you fall under their jurisdiction. So you got to understand your data and your privacy policies around it, make sure it even is being enforced. So this is your future. Definitely 2022, maybe 2021 for a lot of you. But this is something that you didn't have to use to pay attention to that you really will have to pay attention to. All right, so from my side, and I'll let Mike talk for a minute here, but from my side, if you want to understand more about a cybersecurity risk assessment or a network and IT assessment, please contact me. My contact info will be on the slide at the end. Happy to answer any questions, and I will. Do we want to do questions now, Mike, or you want to?
Now let's see if we have any.
Okay. Let me see. I see one here. Oh, so that was my sources. So one of them here is, can my IT guy do the assessment? So as I mentioned earlier, yes, they could theoretically do it, but it's not going to be unbiased. Also, please remember, most IT guys are not trained in cybersecurity. So although they could do it, and although they may be smart people and they may be well-meaning, the reality is they probably don't know or have that unbiased opinion on whether or not you really meet the requirement. Because they might just say, yeah, that's good enough. Well, but if you then get audited from someone else, part of a transaction, well, suddenly that good enough is a fail. So it's better to have an outside firm address those for you. All right. And then, one more. Will a NIST audit satisfy auditors? The answer is usually yes. You need to talk to the auditor, and it depends on what they're auditing. But in the case of some of the more common ones, like a SOC 2 audit, yes, handing that over will thrill them to death because it's a formalized process instead of having them ask you a bunch of questions. So, all right, that's all I got.
So I think we got I don't see anything more under chat questions unless you see some, Ron.
Nope.
So just to kind of close up here, we normally use this slide to tell folks of the next webinar that's coming up. We don't have one at this point in time. I'll tell you one I'd surely like to get scheduled before the end of the year, and it's very timely, has to do with some of these changes coming in the prospective tax law we see coming down the pike. And what I really wanted to touch on, if I can find one of our attorneys who has time to do that sort of thing, is do a webinar on the changes to the estate tax law, because we're working with folks right now, business owners who are really concerned about that. And if you have a business that has some value, you should be concerned too. They're looking at potentially changing the estate tax equivalent amount from like $11.7 million and cutting it in half. So that means that folks who have businesses of value will find that they're going to start looking at the possibility of running into estate tax issues really quickly if the law passes. And obviously, since the tax rate is right now 40%, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the math on this. If the amount you can pass to family, for instance, is cut in half before the taxes kick in, there's a lot at stake, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a lot of folks and millions for others. So if you want to visit about that, I'd be glad to do that. We're hoping to find an attorney that can come in and do our next webinar on that. And if we can do that, I'm going to kind of make it a question and answer thing. So it'll be good for everybody, I think. So nothing scheduled on that yet. If you're on this call, we have your email address, and we'll be sending you an email invite for our next one if we have it set up. So Ron kind of touched on it, and I mentioned that, part of what we do is coaching businesses and making them more valuable. And you might kind of wonder, well, why is building value in a business important? Well, we use what we call a value builder system, and over 60,000 business owners have completed the initial survey where we kind of score the business on strengths and weaknesses. And of those 60,000, there's been thousands of them who have actually gone through the value building process, the coaching process. And a study was done fairly recently in 2018 with some folks who had went through that process, and the average increase in their score was about 18%. So that typically actually relates most of the time to more than an 18% increase in the value of the business. So from a cost to benefit ratio, it's very positive for what you spend to try to build up your business versus what you get out of it. But a lot of times that takes time, and you might be talking about at least 2 years or so of working on your business on things like what Ron talked about today, cybersecurity, IT, a lot of other areas that we touch on. And it just takes a while to clean up a lot of businesses. Most of them are not sellable. And when we have conversations with business brokers and mergers and acquisitions folks, a lot of them tell us the same thing, and that is many businesses are just not ready to go to market. So what we try to do is get them to the point where they are ready. And then after that, we've had the question pop up, well, then what? We've made our business more valuable. We've put together what we call our virtual family office. And if you're familiar with the family office concept, primarily it's used by the super wealthy, but they have created their own family offices where they actually employ people like, this list, Ron, cybersecurity IT experts, but they have them on staff. So they work just for them. Well, most of the folks on this webinar and most of the folks that we talk to don't need those people working for them full time. So what we've done is we went out and vetted people in these areas and other areas as well. And we use those folks on an as needed basis so we can refer people to them if they don't have specialists that they're working with currently. Now, obviously, most of you probably have CPAs, for instance. So in cases like that, we can certainly work with the folks that you're already working with as well. So today's offer from both of us, actually, the first one from Cornerstone is just a complimentary stress test comparing the business and personal financial things And if you question what a stress test might be, the way we define it is stress testing is a process that carefully examines your current planning strategies to assess the likelihood that they'll deliver the results you expect them to in various environments and in various situations. You know, the super rich, people with net worth of 500 million or more, often have stress tests conducted because the tests enable them to make smart decisions, to verify that they likely will get what they want, what they think they've got set up, and to confirm that they're dealing with the right professionals. And sometimes they find that professionals are getting ahead of their skis a little bit and maybe aren't the right people that they ought to be working with. They can also be effective at identifying really big problems or possibly huge mistakes to changes that can be made proactively. So this stress test we're offering, and there's quite a few hours involved in it typically. So this is up to a $2,000 value. And the other one I'm going to let Ron talk about a little bit, his complimentary 30-minute business cybersecurity checkup.
Yep. So what we do is with the checkup is I'll meet with you, Zoom meeting. We have a little scorecard that we will go through with you and ask some core questions that are critical to identifying where you are. And from there, it'll give you that high level view of where to focus your time and attention. Obviously, there are more in-depth assessments, but this is a quick way for you to get a feel. Are you in good shape? Are you not so good shape? And where?
Okay, thanks, Ron. So as far as if you're interested in either one of these, we'll be sending out a follow-up email that you can request either or both of these offers. So be looking for that. If you happen to be not on the call, the actual webinar, and you see us on YouTube and you're interested in those offers, I've got my Calendly link here that you can go to and set up a time to visit with us. And if you want to reach out sooner to us, you can actually call us at our 800 number or my email address listed here, mikem@cfgiowa.com. Remember, as I've mentioned before, we do have a YouTube channel. I'm not going to give you the long address. It's probably too much to write down, but you can certainly get to it by Googling Cornerstone Financial Group YouTube channel. When you get there, you'll see some of the webinars we've done in the past. If you like this webinar, I encourage you to like it on YouTube. And if you're interested in more of these or want to be notified when there are more, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And if you know of somebody else who you think might be interested in some of the topics that we have either today with Ron or some of the prior ones we've had, be sure to share those with those folks. So with that, any last comments, Ron?
No, I'm looking forward to talking to folks. If you have any interest in the cyber side of things, please do not be that one person who sticks their head in the sand. Actually, you'll not be alone. There'll be plenty of company down there. But whether or not you utilize us, definitely have somebody take a look and make this a business priority. It's always tough, but it should be probably your number one priority right now.
Totally agree. So with that, I want to thank you, Ron, for presenting today at our webinar. And I want to thank all the folks who attended us and attended this webinar, and go out and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. All right.